Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Collins with URL Insurance Group. I'm an agent support specialist here at URL, specializing in single premium life, long-term care insurance. First off, I want to thank everyone for being, on the call today and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Those of you that are currently doing business with URL, I want to offer a big thank you. We understand that you have many options as to where you can place your business, and we appreciate you working with URL Insurance Group. We take pleasure in our dedication to your success. Some of you that are on the call today that are new to URL, I want to take a moment and welcome you. URL is a full-service national broker that specializes in single premium life, fixed and indexed annuities, traditional life insurance, as well as employee benefits and group health plans. In addition to that, we also have our senior division that offers Medicare Supplement and Medicare Advantage. So, just take a moment after this webinar, kind of kick around our website at www.urlinsgroup.com. Discover if there are any other additional avenues for us to assist with your success. So again, that website is www.urlinsgroup.com. Just real quick, we also have what we call our Orion platform. The Orion platform, in its nutshell, is an avenue for you as an agent to make a sale in an area that you typically wouldn't. So if you're a Medicare agent right now and you're doing open enrollment and you have a long-term care opportunity come across your desk, or an annuity or a life insurance, and you either don't have the time or you're not necessarily licensed in a particular state, reach out to us. It's almost like a warm lead. We'll reach out to your client. We'll make the sale, and then we'll compensate you as the agent. So you don't have to worry about leaving any sort of, business off the table. You're able to help everybody and anybody. So again, that's our Orion platform. It is absolutely my pleasure to present this program for you today. As many of you all know, long-term care insurance is typically an underutilized concept to your client's retirement portfolio. An unprepared client can see their life savings wiped out in no time should they receive any sort of unforeseen health news. Single premium life, the hybrid long-term care, and annuities with long-term care chassis have been really growing in popularity the past few years and have been a wonderful alternative to the traditional use it or lose it, rising premium cost traditional long-term care that most clients are familiar with. Baby boomers are starting to realize that they need to start preparing for a home or health nursing care event in their life. And, they're hesitant for various reasons. So that's where you come in. Make sure you ask the questions. Perhaps they've experienced a long-term care situation with a loved one or a family member in recent years. Find out if they have cash value in old whole life policies with increasing premiums that they want to get rid of. Do they have money set aside and earmarked for the next generation, making little or no interest in CDs or, multi-year guaranteed annuities or something like that. That's where Jess is going to come in. Jess, I want to introduce you, Jess DeLilio. She's the regional vice president nationwide. She's an expert in all long-term care solutions, and she's going to be emceeing our presentation today with Nationwide. Nationwide is a top-notch company when you're dealing with any of these long-term care, the care matters they came out with. And again, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'll let you go through your portfolio, but Nationwide to me is, there's Nationwide and then there's everybody else out there. So, anyway, Jess, I do want to talk about, there is some handouts that you're going to see on the right side of the presentation here. If you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A area. We'll make sure that somebody says that they can't hear me. Can you hear me, Jess?
I can hear you. Yeah, I was wondering perhaps maybe they didn't have their volume turned up because it seems like everybody else.
Okay. So it looks like everything's running okay on my end. So, Jess, we'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And thank you for the time today. And the time on the agenda. I love this topic. To your point, I think that this is an underserved part of our practice while being an incredibly important part of our practice. To your point, baby boomers are really, starting to need this protection. And you guys are in a great position to ask these questions, have these conversations. And what we're going to talk about today is a couple of ways to start these conversations, and then some tips and tricks, if you will, to kind of address various different clients within your book of business and your practice. So Couple of things to note before I get started. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. Although we do have a team of CPAs and attorneys at our advanced consulting group that's available to you. Highly recommend you reach out to them if we start to work on live cases together, and or the client's advisors, attorneys, CPAs as well. So just wanted to give that quick disclosure before we start to dig in to some of this. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about a variety of different things. One is going to be the shifting market, kind of where we were in long-term care planning and where we're going with long-term care planning. We're going to address some of the objections that we often hear when we're having these conversations with our clients. And then I'm going to talk to you about how do we classify our clients to make it easier to overcome those objections, right? Because not everybody has the same issues. So we're going to try to break it down a little bit to simplify this process. And then we're going to talk about customizing your strategies for each of those buckets of clients that we talk about. And then we're going to end with some sales ideas, kind of where to find the funding for some of the solutions we discussed today. So I think it'll be a really well-rounded conversation. As Jason mentioned, the chat box is open, so feel free to pop in questions there as we're going. You don't have to save them to the very end. Absolutely want to make sure that you guys are getting the most out of this content today. So with that, we'll start with the shifting marketplace. And Jason alluded to this in his introduction, kind of where we were versus where we are. And if you look back and take a snapshot in time in the past, traditional long-term care policies, kind of that use it or lose it concept, was really all we had for our clients, right? And think about it. It worked similar to our auto or home policies, right? You pay into this product. The insurance carrier can control your premium. It can go up every year, rarely goes down, right? And then if you don't ever have a claim, you really never get anything out of that policy. So although that was our solution in the past, and you'll see there the statistics of 750,000 policies, and then over time that significantly decreased because we've had those periods of time where the carriers have been sending out those premium increase notifications, and some of them have been pretty steep. So a lot of folks have kind of gotten away from that idea of that as their solution. Well, what's taken its place is these hybrid or combo LTC solutions, whether it's life insurance with a rider or the hybrid solutions like we have, Care Matters. And those have grown greatly over time. So where we've seen that decrease and step away from those traditional LTC solutions, we've seen the increase to these multi-purposed solutions where it's not that use it or lose it concept, where you've got death benefit, you've got cash value, you've got surrender value. It's kind of that multifaceted solution that we've seen clients, kind of look towards versus that traditional policy. So with that, we'll take a look at the industry and kind of the opportunity, I'll call it, that's out there in the marketplace right now. So you've probably heard a variety of statistics about how many clients indeed would actually need long-term care at some point in their life. And what we've seen is it's about 52% of clients will have a long-term care event in their lifetime and need, some sort of funding, whether it's from their own bank coffers or if they have a solution like we're going to talk about today. They'll end up needing some financial support to help fund their long-term care event. But what we see is that people over 55, only 8% of those clients have a long-term care solution. So to me, that spells out a huge opportunity for clients and for us to educate our clients and share the solutions that we have with them. So that's where I think, for us, as advisors and financial professionals, we have the opportunity. Now, I'll add that typically statistics aren't something we want to share with clients. So while this is very valuable and impactful for us on this line, this is not something that I would necessarily put in front of a client. And we'll kind of get into some of the psychology behind that as we go on. But this is an important statistic for us to know, just to kind of frame the opportunity that's out there. So we'll start to get into a little bit of the conversation piece. And a lot of times when folks hear the term long-term care, when you're not in the industry and you don't talk about this every day, a lot of folks often think that long-term care is a place, and that place is a nursing home. And when you say long-term care to them, their mind and their blinders kind of go up, And that's immediately what they think of. And unfortunately for us, that kind of limits our conversation. So I would suggest trying to not use the term long-term care as we have in the past. They have that idea of lose it or use it. That traditional long-term care solution comes to mind. Nursing home comes to mind. Costs come to mind. Things that don't necessarily help us in our conversation. So we're going to kind of talk about that today and give you some alternative language to use as we're going on throughout this conversation. So I think it's important to keep in mind the client's perception of what long-term care is versus how we know it, and that it can differ greatly in our conversations. So we're going to talk about conquering the objections, and oftentimes what we kind of hear in our conversations that kind of stop us in our tracks and unfortunately stop our conversation with the clients. I would highly recommend kind of looking at your business and looking at your book of business and breaking your clients up into 3 different tiers, because each of these tiers is going to have a different approach and a different set of consequences that we're going to talk to them about. And notice I'm using the term consequences, not risks, because I think, again, that's a term that kind of helps us facilitate this conversation versus putting up that roadblock and that defensiveness perhaps that some clients might feel. So we're going to talk about 3 tiers of clients. One is going to be our middle class client, and this is going to be our most popular client for our long-term care solution. We'll talk about what makes them different and what makes each of these tiers different in a moment. Our affluent clients, which are going to be, our wealthy individuals, but clients that don't have an estate tax liability concern. And then we're going to talk about our high net worth clients. And those are going to be our wealthy individuals that do have an estate tax liability concern. We're going to talk about the variations between each of these, how they have some unique consequences, and conversation starters for each of them today. And we're going to customize our approach to each of these clients. So this is really the important part of the conversation. Obviously, we all know that our client-to-client conversations are going to vary from client to client. No 2 conversations are going to be the same between our clients, whether we're talking about long-term care or any other insurance or investment solution. But we can put them into buckets, and in general, we'll have some similarities between them. So we're going to talk about that today and kind of match our discussion with each of our clients' wealth points. We're going to focus again on those consequences, and we're not going to use the term risk. We're going to use consequence. And then we're going to really look to get those win-win solutions, those solutions that if the client doesn't have that long-term care experience, if they're in that other bucket that never needs long-term care, that they're still getting something out of this solution. So we're going to really focus on those multi-solution products that we can offer for the clients. So let's dig into our middle class clients first, and we'll start with them. So again, we kind of want to avoid using that term long-term care right out of the gate, because that's going to, again, put that notation in their head of nursing home. And a lot of clients will think, well, I'm not going to a nursing home. I want to get care at home. And that's a really valuable point there, because most clients want to stay at home as long as they can. And most of our claims are for home care. So it is fair for them to say, well, if I'm not going to a nursing home, I don't need long-term care insurance. And that's where we want to pivot that conversation and say, well, long-term care is not a place, it's an event. And we want to help you to plan for that. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to focus in on that care at home conversation. That's going to be really important. And we're going to start to have conversations with these folks about their plan. So notice we're not going to talk about a product. We're going to start with talking about a plan. Where do they want to receive care? In an ideal world, if money wasn't an object, where would they want to receive care? How would they want to receive that care? And who is going to give them that care? So you might hear things like, well, yeah, I want to stay at home as long as I can. And, I would love my daughter to come in and take care of me, or my son's going to help, he's going to come and take care of the house for me. And, she might be running errands or grabbing groceries and helping with my medication, etc. And that's great. But have you talked to your children about this plan? Do they know that that's your wish? And have you written this plan down anywhere? I can't stress enough the importance of having a written plan and your client's wishes documented somewhere. and sharing that location with a loved one, letting them know, hey, my daughter's going to be my power of attorney, and I have my wishes documented in this file, in this drawer. When the time comes, I've got everything noted out for you. So it's really important for family life. I can't stress it enough. If you've got multiple kids, when the time comes that you're going to need care, it can create a huge stressor. And I know this from personal experience. It can create a huge stressor if you don't have your wishes shared. Well, one sibling says, Mom wanted this and she told me that. The second sibling says, Mom wanted that and she told me this. And next thing you know, you have infighting between your kids, yet alone the finances that we'll talk about in a minute. But having a plan and sharing that plan is an incredibly important part of this process. And once you talk to your client about their wishes and their desires for how to receive care, we can then easily pivot into the funding conversation, because then we just want to figure out how to fund what they want. So they've already shared with you, they want to stay home. They want their kids to be able to take care of them. Well, that's great, but that's going to limit your scope of solutions, because now you're probably going to be looking for an indemnity-based solution. And that's what Nationwide has to offer versus some other solutions in the industry like reimbursement plans. So again, we want to talk about consequences and not risks. So we want to talk about, what if we don't plan for this? What happens then? Chances are you might not be able to afford the plan of your desires. So let's talk about how we can fund that for you, how we can sustain your lifestyle and that of your spouse. They might say, hey, I've got a great spouse. She's a nurse. She's going to take care of me. Oh, that's fantastic. Is she on board with that plan? And are you aware of the consequences to a caretaker and what that does to their health in the future? Because we have a lot of statistics around deteriorating health of a caregiver from a family taking care of a loved one, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And then how are we going to preserve those assets for your loved ones? What if we have this long-term care event that is very costly to you and your estate, and we have to spend down all of your assets? And we have to spend them down to the point where we might be qualifying for Medicaid now. And what does that do to your choices for care and where you're receiving care and how you're receiving care if we've now spent down all of your assets and we're qualifying for Medicaid? We have very limited options at that point. So these are all the unique things that come with this conversation with our middle-class clients, which again are going to be the vast majority of the folks we're chatting with. So when we talk about these clients and we begin to pivot that conversation from our plan conversation to our funding conversation, some of the things we have to keep in mind is that there may be some budgetary and asset constrictions that we have to work within. Where are we going to find the funding for this solution? We'll chat about that in a minute. And then there might be some other needs that we need to take into consideration. This family, depending on where they're at, they might need long-term care and life insurance. So that's something unique that we'll need to discuss, and we've got solutions for both. Or they might be looking specifically just for long-term care coverage. And they might want a family member to actually provide that care like we talked about on the last slide. So how do we provide all that flexibility to them? We want to focus in on that win-win solution, right? Where, hey, if they end up being in that bucket that doesn't need care, what happens to all that money you've paid into this solution? So we want to focus on those win-win solutions for them. And here's an idea that we have. So we talk about self-funding, right? A client might come to you and say, listen, I have $100,000 sitting in this annuity that I really don't need for income. And that's going to be my long-term care bucket. That's going to be what I use for long-term care if the time comes when I have a long-term care event and I need some help. Wonderful that your client has already thought about that and has funds earmarked for it. What if I could show you a better way to do what you're already doing and self-funding that? We could just create a couple little pivots with that. So we have that annuity that's sitting on the shelf. $100,000 is in there. In this example, this is a 60-year-old female. We're going to annuitize that. So we're going to do a 10-year period certain out of her annuity. We're going to generate almost $12,000 out of the annuity over 10 years annually. We're going to pay our taxes out of it. So we're going to have almost $11,000, we'll say, left after she's paid taxes. And we're going to do a 10-pay into a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider on it. And what we've done with this is we've now taken our $100,000 that was in our annuity, and we've more than tripled that amount, $305,000, for not only long-term care, but also life insurance. So if something should happen to her without needing any long-term care, her family, her beneficiary, would get over $300,000 in life insurance proceeds. And if she ends up needing care during her lifetime, she'll have a bucket of money of over $300,000 that she can draw down from for long-term care coverage. So again, that win-win solution. And we've just shown her a better way to do what she's already doing. She has money earmarked for long-term care, and we're showing her how she can create this phenomenal leverage to get more money out of her plan. So this is one way to kind of uncover assets with your client, is to ask about any annuities that might be sitting on their shelf that they don't necessarily need for income, and how we can reposition that into a life insurance with a long-term care solution for that. And here's another idea. So Jason brought this up earlier, CDs, right? Lots of our clients have CDs sitting at the bank, and that might be their earmarked bucket for long-term care, or their emergency fund for health insurance if they need it, or healthcare costs if they need it. So this client has $100,000 sitting in the CD. Now, if you take a look at these statistics as time goes on, the CD will grow, right? And assuming that we pay taxes on this out of pocket, at age 99, she'll have $461,000 sitting in that CD. Chances are long-term care is going to happen somewhere in between that, between today at age 60 and age 99, probably in the 80s statistically is what we see. So what if we can just show this client how to reposition that CD money into a Care Matters policy, that linked benefit with long-term care? So we create this immediate leverage with it, which is the beauty of this. We take your $100,000, and immediately she has $471,000 for long-term care, should a claim occur, whether that's today, tomorrow, the next day, years down the road. Immediate leverage for the client. And there is a residual death benefit with this also. So let's assume that she uses every single penny of this for long-term care. She gets the most out of this policy. Her beneficiary still gets $31,000 at her passing. And if she falls into that bucket of never needing long-term care, there's a death benefit associated with this of $157,000. So again, that win-win solution where if you don't use it, there's still something in there for your beneficiaries. There's a surrender value with this also. And if you do use it, you still get residual death benefit for your beneficiaries. So we're just showing clients a way to reposition their funds into a solution that's going to create better leverage for them and a better long-term care solution for them. Any questions so far? Again, you can pop them in the chat if you'd like. Okay, we'll keep plugging along then.
Yeah, sorry, I had my mic muted. Yeah, you're doing great. There's explaining everything very well. There's no questions.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep plugging along here because I've got some more ideas for you as we talk about some of these other tiers of clients. So our next client is our affluent client, where they have no tax liability. And this is something you need to keep in mind because as you guys most likely know, in 2026, there looks to be a rollback of that estate tax. So more clients are going to fall into the bucket of having an estate tax liability. So right now, what we're looking at is single clients, about $1.5 million to $13 million, and married clients, about $3 million to $25 million. This would change in 2025 if everything rolls back the way we think it will. So keep in mind, this is kind of a moving target for us. And this can be one of the hardest groups of clients to work with. And we'll talk about that. Generally, they can afford better healthcare, right? They're in a price point where they can go out there. They're getting kind of the best of everything medically. They're most likely to give you the most pushback on needing long-term care because they're so healthy, right? They're not going to need it. They're not going to be that group of folks that has an event that causes them financial distress. So something to keep in mind, though, and a unique conversation starter is the longer you live, the more likely it is that you will need long-term care. So it's kind of that catch-22 of you are in great shape and you're doing everything right and taking care of yourself. But the longer you live, the higher that chance of needing long-term care, long-term care protection and funding for you. A lot of these folks plan to self-insure, and we'll talk about why that's simply not possible based on the definition of insurance. And they don't like that typical long-term care conversation. So we're going to pivot our conversation to the idea of self-assuring. So when we think about these clients, think back on what they've experienced and kind of everything that they've been through. I think this will help frame the conversation for us. They've most likely remember the dot-com crash of 2001, the 2008 crash, real estate, banking debacle. That's probably still fresh in their mind. And they might even remember Black Monday from 1987. So they've kind of seen these big swings in the market, and they've experienced a lot of this. And that can help us with our conversation, keeping that in mind of that kind of experience they've had with these big ups and downs in their portfolio. So that's something we want to use in our conversation to talk about insuring their portfolio against that unexpected long-term care event. What happens if that event, their long-term care event, happens when the market is down? What if we experience another 2008 when you're needing care and we have to start liquidating assets at an all-time low? That's happened to them before. They've seen that swing before, so they will have a reference point to have that conversation with you. And while you can self-fund, self-insure, as folks say, although we know by definition you can't self-insure, there's no guarantee that when you need that money from your portfolio, it's going to be the best time to be taking that money from your portfolio. So again, when we pivot back to the idea of creating our plan, it's important to talk about, where do you want to take this money? If you are planning to self-fund and you have your money invested, where do you want us to liquidate first? Is it this series of stocks? Is it this series of mutual funds? Is it this account? Is it that account? What if the market's down? Then what's our plan B? Having that all lined up for your client and having that conversation with them allows you to easily transition the conversation into talking about insurance solutions to create leverage. Because all of that will then have these conversations about, what if the market's down? What do we do then? Do we still want to liquidate from this account? How do we recover from that? Knowing that it could be a long trajectory to get that account back up. And do we have that kind of time? Having those conversations with your clients can easily pivot us into solutions where we can guarantee streams of income for long-term care expenses. So I think that's really something important to keep in mind with that. So how do we create this win-win for these clients? We talked about it with our middle class bucket. How do we create it for our affluent clients? And again, we want to try to steer them away from self-insuring. We obviously can't do that. When you think about insurance, the idea of that is to create immediate leverage on your own money, which you can't do if you're self-funding. So what if I could show you a way to do a similar thing, self-fund this, and create even stronger leverage with a solution? So again, we want to kind of focus in on that. We want to talk about assets and income that are available. We want to talk about, do they need more life insurance now and long-term care later, or do they want a life insurance specific solution today? So one of the ways we can talk about that is talking about linked benefits. So we'll talk about care matters for your affluent client. So right now we're self-insuring or self-funding. They have $100,000 set aside. They have $100,000 in that bucket of money. They can use all of that money to spend down for their long-term care event and their long-term care expenses. And once that bucket is done, they will need to then figure out where else they're going to pivot to continue to fund long-term care. Now, what if I could show you a way to reposition that $100,000 that they have earmarked and create some immediate leverage? We'll take that $100,000 and we'll reposition this into Care Matters, immediately creating $540,000 of long-term care funding for them. Immediate. That's the insurance part of this that you can't do without a product. There's a death benefit of $180,000 associated with this. So again, that win-win, if something happens and they don't use it, their beneficiary gets their $180,000, creating leverage on the death benefit as well as the long-term care solution. Now they use all of that money, and we break Care Matters into two buckets. Essentially, this gets a little technical. We'll kind of skim over it for today, but we can certainly address this in more detail. Jason and his team are well versed in this as well. They use $100,000, which is the money that they put in, and then we pivot to our extension rider, which gives them the $440,000. So $540,000 total for long-term care. They're getting $7,500 a month. It's indemnity based. No receipts are needed. We don't ask any questions about how they're spending the money. They could pay their son or daughter to come in and take care of them, the neighbor to run and get groceries for them. Complete flexibility is given to the client for how they use their money. And then assume they spend on all of that money. They use all of their money for long-term care. At their passing, there's still $36,000 for their beneficiary. So a win-win for everybody involved in this. So we've just shown them a better way to take their $100,000 that they already have earmarked for long-term care and pivot it into Care Matters and create more than 5 times the amount of protection for themselves. Now, say they already had the $100,000 set aside. That's great. That's the model we just went through. But say they don't want to reposition that money. What if, they're affluent clients, they've done a great job saving for retirement. There's going to be a variety of places that they're going to pull income from in retirement. What if we reposition their Social Security payment for long-term care protection? And here's a way to look at a life insurance policy with an LTC rider. So we're going to take this gentleman's Social Security payment, $25,000 a year. He's 66. And we're going to reposition that into a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. So what this is going to do is that $25,000 a year for 15 years, we're not paying this for the rest of his life. We're short paying this. So a fixed definition of the payments going in. This is going to provide him with $650,000 in death benefit. So heaven forbid anything happen without him needing this care. His beneficiary is going to get $650,000. And then we're going to be able to provide $13,000 a month for 50 months if he should need long-term care. Oh, sorry. Thank you for letting me know. I'm referencing my notes on my other screen. I don't know if you guys can tell. But yeah, so this is going to then create $13,000 a month for long-term care coverage for him. So this is that win-win solution for this. Death benefit for the beneficiary should he pass away without needing long-term care, or monthly benefit for him should he need long-term care. And you'll see here in this chart, it's actually showing you that at his life expectancy of age 82, he would need to have generated a guaranteed 8.62% in his investments to generate the same return that he's getting from this. So for our analytical clients, not all of them fall into that bucket, but for our analytical clients, I like to show this, and you can put this on your proposals. Jason and his team know how to do that. You can actually run this extra report that will show your clients how this works and the IRR that they would need to generate outside of the life insurance policy to generate the same return within it. So this is a great way to show your clients, hey, an alternative. Let's utilize that Social Security that you might not need to live off of to fund your long-term care solution and or your legacy plan. Because again, if he doesn't use this, his beneficiaries are getting over $650,000. Any questions on that?
Sorry, there's lag on my unmuting. No, you're doing great.
Awesome. Well, then we will continue and we'll talk about our high net worth clients. And these are probably a very tricky group of folks that we work with. These are the clients that they're very financially comfortable. They might tell you, I can afford to buy the nursing home. And that might be true. They might be in a position where they could actually buy the nursing home. So why in heaven's name would we be talking to them about this? They can certainly self-fund. That's certainly, something that they could do and cover the cost of a long-term care experience for themselves. So our current buckets are, if they're single, we're looking at $12.9 million or more. If they're married, we're looking at almost $26 million. And again, keep in mind, 2025, those brackets we expect to change, and more folks will be exposed to this. So you'll have more clients to talk to in this bucket. They afford that better healthcare, right? They're getting the best of everything. With that comes the caveat of they want the best of everything. So when you talk to them about their plan for long-term care, they probably want to stay home, want to have the best care at home. And if they need to go to a facility, they probably are looking at some of the best facilities that we have to offer in this country. So their plan is they're going to self-fund this. They've got the bank account to do so. They certainly don't respond well to that typical LTC conversation. So I'm going to show you a couple of unique ways to have this conversation with this bucket of clients. And we're going to talk about the cost of getting lucky. And I'll explain what that means in a minute, but it's really troublesome to this group of clients. And we're going to talk about the risk that comes along with them setting aside money within their estate to self-fund. We're going to go through all of that, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. So here's a little graphic that I have that shows about what happens when you self-insure or self-fund for a high net worth client. So they've got $1 million that they've set aside for their care, because again, we're probably looking at expensive facilities and expensive care to come into the home. So that $100,000 that we were talking about needs to be a little bit more for this client. So we're talking about keeping these assets within the estate and keeping them liquid so that they're available should they have a long-term care claim. So remember that statistic from the very beginning. We see that about 52% of clients need care. So how do we know when this client will need care or how much they'll need for their care? That's kind of the caveat to this conversation and the struggle that we'll have, because none of us can predict the future and know which of our clients are going to need care. It would make us a lot more effective if we could, or if we did know that. So there's a 48% chance that this client that set aside $1 million will not need this $1 million for their care. Remember, these are clients that are going to have an estate tax liability. So what happens to that $1 million if they peacefully pass away in their sleep one night? That falls into their estate tax bucket. And that could be as much as a 40% tax liability for them. So that $1 million that we've set aside, 400,000 of that has now gone to the government because we kept that inside of our estate, sitting on the sidelines for that moment of what if I need long-term care. So we've just created a huge issue because we got lucky and we passed away peacefully in our sleep. And we didn't need the long-term care that we thought we might. So this is the cost of being lucky and not needing long-term care. For this particular design, it's a cost of about $400,000. And that's something that's unique to this tier of clients that we need to have in our conversation. So let's talk a little bit about some solutions to avoid that cost of getting lucky. So because the solutions at Nationwide are indemnity-based, which means you don't need receipts and we just pay out the money every month as scheduled per the contract, our solutions can be owned inside of an ILET, which then protects that money from estate taxes. So we're going to get a little bit technical on these slides here. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or ask me to pause and review something. And these are the clients where most likely we are going to want to involve the client's CPAs and their attorneys as well. We want to make sure that our trust is drafted so that we can do the things we're going to talk about. So it's really important that we've had attorneys on board. They know what this concept is. We can certainly consult with our attorneys at Nationwide and make sure that everybody is well-versed on what we want this to accomplish. So the long-term care benefits, because they're indemnity-based, they're going to be paid into the trust to the trustee. We're going to use a collateralized arm's length loan to then get those funds out of the trust without creating incidents of ownership. That's very important. It's very important that we've worded the trust correctly so that we can do this. We want to exchange assets, and that's going to be using the arm's length loan obligation for the money out of the trust. We're going to put up collateral, could be a beach house. We'll talk about that in a second. We're going to charge an interest rate from the trust to get the money out. And then we're going to repay this loan in full, ideally before the insured passes away. So why reimbursement plans don't work for this is because that can create that incident of ownership. And that's what we really need to avoid in this design. So we'll look at a hypothetical example here. We've got a client, we'll call her Jane. She's got a $5 million estate tax liability. So we're going to assume we're using a nationwide solution here. So we're going to purchase a $5 million policy, and we're going to put on a $1 million long-term care rider onto that product. So $5 million owned by the ILET, $1 million LTC rider. Of that 5, owned by the ILET. You can split this up. So if you're working with a product that isn't a nationwide solution and you can't dial that up and down, you could technically write 2 policies, a $4 million life policy without a rider, and then $1 million policy with a rider. Keep it easy today. We'll assume everybody's selling nationwide here and that we're just going to use a $5 million product with a $1 million rider. We're going to put up collateral, which is going to be the vacation home. We're going to charge an interest rate of 7%. And we're going to allow that loan interest to accrue and capitalize inside of the trust. So we're going to build that up over time. Now, here's what that looks like. So the nationwide policy pays the LTC benefit to the trust. We're assuming Jane has an event. She needs long-term care funding. We're going to trigger that by processing our claim. Nationwide's then going to pay $10,000 a month to the trust. Jane is going to borrow that money from the trust to pay her long-term care expenses. We're going to assume that Jane dies just as we're getting through all of the money for long-term care. So the $1 million that we set aside for long-term care. We're also going to assume that that interest has accrued from the loan to the tune of $352,000. So the debt owed to the trust is $1.3 million, a little bit over that. At her passing, remember, we had the $5 million policy. We used $1 million of that for long-term care. We have $4 million left. $4 million is being paid into the trust from the life insurance policy. The estate repays the principal of the $1 million that they borrowed, plus the interest on that loan that accrued. So $1.352 million gets paid into the loan from the estate, or into the trust from the estate. The result is the trust now has $5.3 million in it. $4 million from the life insurance policy, the $3.2 that we paid back from what we borrowed, and now we have $5.352 in the trust, which means it's not in the estate. None of that is taxable. So that's what we did there, was we created this bucket of money inside of the trust that won't have that cost of being lucky associated with it. We've been able to move money into the trust, pull money to and from the trust without it being in the estate. So we've offset that $400,000 that they would have experienced from being lucky and having that money sitting outside of the trust. And we've created this really nice way to fund this using an ILET and avoiding that extra cost to the estate. So we're going to talk about a second option here. And this is a client that maybe doesn't want the life insurance side. They're more geared towards the Care Matters side, towards the long-term care side. So we're going to talk about this high net worth individual, 55-year-old client. She's a female. We're going to look at using Care Matters inside of a trust for her. And it's going to work similarly. So we're going to put this inside of the ILET. We're going to avoid those potential estate taxes because we're not leaving it outside in the estate exposed to taxes potentially. And we're going to follow those same loan provisions that we talked about in the previous slide. We need collateral. We need to assign an interest rate for the loan that we're taking from the trust to be paid back. And ideally, we'd like to pay back all of that interest and principal before the individual passes away. So we'll take our single premium of $197,000. We'll put it into our Care Matters policy, and we've created over $1 million of potential long-term care funding for them by using the leverage in Care Matters. If she uses all of the long-term care, she then has $72,000 left for her guaranteed death benefit to her trust. If she doesn't, then if she uses no long-term care, then there's $360,000 of guaranteed death benefit that gets paid into her trust. So let's walk through this just a little bit. So the $15,000 is what we're going to get from Care Matters into the trust every month over 6 years. The estate is going to repay the principal that's borrowed. So that a little bit over $1 million is going to get repaid from the estate into the trust. Ideally, we want to repay that interest right before death, if we can, of $309,000. That's dictated by the interest rate that the client chose in their trust. That can vary, and we'll talk to the CPA and the attorney about that. Now, all of those funds in that first estate bracket that you see there, those are removed from the estate. They're no longer taxable at that 40% rate. So about 1.3 million, a little over that, has now been removed from the estate. In the trust, how this works is the estate repays the principal. They repay the loan interest that's not subject to estate tax. We get that guaranteed death benefit we talked about of $72,000. And now the total in the trust is a little over $1.4 million. So let's do the math on the cost that this plan actually ended up costing the client. They paid that single premium. Keep that in mind. That was $197,000. That's what it cost her to purchase this policy inside of the trust. The tax savings that we had by moving that was $123,000. And then we had that guaranteed death benefit as well. So the actual cost to the client to execute this plan was a little over $2,000. So when you break down that math, it almost seems silly to not do this. And the clients that we're talking to have made savvy financial decisions their entire life. So while, yes, technically they could afford to self-fund this and buy the nursing home using their own dollars, why would you want to when you could use the insurance company's dollars? And it's just another smart, financially savvy decision they're making. So for them, it's not about need, that this would be a devastating blow to their portfolio should they have this experience of a long-term care event. This is about just making another smart financial decision along their financial path that they've made. So this is really where I think it gets interesting for these highly affluent clients, and kind of showing them the leverage this can create, not only just from the purchase of the product, but putting it in an eyelet, how this can negate estate taxes as well. So before I go ahead, any questions at this point? I do see it looked like I skipped a slide. I talked through that slide, so I did skip it. I apologize. I can go back to it if you'd like me to.
And maybe just real quick, just to kind of get it up on the screen. I wouldn't dwell on it, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this was the one that I skipped. Yep, I think we went right from this one to the slide after this. So this was the cost of getting lucky. And we kind of talked through what that meant. And then we dug into that a little bit more in this slide. So I think that was the one that I skipped over.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jess.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your flexibility.
Oh, gosh, of course. Happy to. Happy to. I wanted to show this slide. This is kind of where I sum everything up for you. The solutions that we talked about, I think most folks would agree that they're great. They create leverage. They take the risk away from the client at a potentially devastating financial long-term care event. The biggest issue I think we find is, where do I find the funding for these solutions? How do I help my client uncover things that they might already have in their portfolio that we could reposition versus taking out of money from income? And I like this slide because it kind of goes over, depending on where the client is in their journey, whether, you know, they're kind of in their peak income earning years, or maybe they're already retired, these little asterisks here can show you some trigger points as to say, hey, you know, do you have any of those CDs that Jason mentioned? Maybe you have a money market account kind of sitting over there. You might be getting an inheritance. Things that we might not think about in our day-to-day conversation. This slide kind of puts them all in one place for you to help kind of uncover some ideas to fund these solutions. So to kind of break down what we talked about today, the idea of classifying your clients into 3 tiers helps you to decide which path you want to take in your conversation. And it's not going to be the same for every client. We all know that. We want to keep our conversations very individual. But these unique tiers that we talked about all have some similarities. And hopefully some of the things we talked about today, some of the phrases we use, will help you in those conversations going forward. We want to make sure that we're matching those conversations with the wealth profiles we talked about. We want to avoid those statistics. They're great for you and I and our industry professional peers, not so great for clients. So we want to avoid those. We want to talk more about consequences versus risks, talking to them about generating that plan. How do they want to receive care? Where do they want to receive care? And who is giving them care? That easily helps us to pivot into the conversation of funding. If we're self-funding, what are we liquidating first? What are we doing if the market is down? Do we have a plan B? Does your family know about this? The last thing you want to do is be liquidating assets, and the kids are sitting there watching their inheritance go out the door and thinking, why didn't you talk to mom and dad about planning? Create that plan, document that plan, share that plan. Then we can talk about funding that plan. Strive for the win-win solution. Clients that end up in the bucket that don't need long-term care, what happens to the money they've put into the plan? Look for those plans that give a death benefit, surrender value, and long-term care solutions. And then lastly, look for those assets to reposition. Maybe there's annuity money sitting out there they don't need, Social Security money they're not going to depend on, inheritance money, etc. Look for those ways to easily reposition assets. I like to think of it as moving it from one hand to the next. We're not taking it off the balance sheet. We're just moving it from one column to the next, and easily reposition those assets to generate leverage. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jason, and you can throw any questions at me that you might have, or
Yeah, I had one that came up in my day-to-day here at the office that, you touched on middle class and high net worth. And what about somebody a client who has the money, but says, I'm just going to do that spend down. You touched on it in your summary. I'm going to have Medicaid pay for it. You have those clients that are out there that, have the money, but they just think, I'm just going to sell everything off and just go into some sort of nursing home facility somewhere and have the government, somebody pay for, what do you do in that? Is it a conversation hurdle that you have in your quiver?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes from misconceptions.
Yeah.
I think clients think that Medicaid is more robust than it is.
Yep.
And that they're going to have more freedom and flexibility with it than they are. I would go back to that planning conversation and start with, ideally, how would you like to receive care? Where would you like to receive care? And from whom? And then you can perhaps pivot that to the Medicaid conversation and about the lack of flexibility and, really the limitations that program provides for a client, that you have no choices really at that point. You have your list of Medicaid approved facilities. If you can get a bed in one of them, fantastic. It might not be the one of your choosing, and kind of walk them through what Medicaid really is and what it really covers. I think a lot of times clients just are confused. They don't do this every day. And unless they've been through this process with a loved one, they really might not understand what Medicaid means. So I think educating them on, hey, you've told me this is your plan and your wishes, and this is how you'd like to receive care and where you'd like to receive care. But then you've also told me that you want to be on Medicaid. Do you understand what the Medicaid program is and what it provides for? Because there's a disconnect between that. I just want to help to make sure that I get you to the plan you want, and yes, I can help you do that. So I think it's really education for clients. A lot of them think, oh, my insurance is going to pay for that. Oh, Medicaid is going to pay for that.
Right.
Just a misconception.
Great. Okay. That's great. Well, I don't see any other questions on here. So you did a fantastic job as always. Oh, here we go. We have one here that came up, thoughts about the new legislation that would be similar to what the state of Washington did. That's a great question. That's very, a lot of the middle class is still in the traditional LTC world. So is that something that you're ready to discuss, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So right now we're really keeping an eye on a couple of states. California, for one, they seem to be the best versed at this right now. They kind of have a committee that's in place that's really studying options. Last I checked, they had 5 different options that they were studying and reviewing. Nothing has been passed yet at this time for them. New York is the other one, kind of also researching, although it seems that theirs was kind of a cut and paste of Washington. Ironically, kind of down to the typos, literally. We saw some of that, which I found very ironic. but both are out of session right now. So we won't be seeing anything happen at least for 6 months in those states. So we're keeping an eye on all the states that are kind of proposing legislation and considering it, but nothing has passed yet at this time. So we're kind of in a bit of a holding pattern. How I would address that with clients is to recommend doing just good old-fashioned long-term care planning. We can't make any promises that anything that we sell today will qualify for any tax discounts or tax savings based on a plan that's passed, because we just don't know what's going to be passed at this time. So my recommendation would be just plan for the best you can based on their circumstances, but don't make any promises about anything that you sell that could potentially, opt them out of a future program, simply because we just don't know what the future holds with these right now. And there's too many variables to predict it.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and a great answer. Well, I think that looks like that's pretty much it. We're right at the, thanks, Bertrand. Yeah, appreciate the interaction that you have had throughout this presentation. Definitely. So Jess, thank you so much. Again, for those that you don't know, November's Long-Term Care Awareness Month. So, it's a great time to be getting out there and having these conversations with your clients. A lot of materials out there. If you need anything, certainly reach out to me. My number is 717-216-8038. My email address is jasonc@urlinsgroup.com. We're certainly going to follow up with everybody. Everybody's going to get a copy of this presentation. My contact information is going to be in there. Jess and her team at Nationwide have they've just been so helpful, and they're just so hands-on and willing to help at any turn with anything. So, I appreciate the partnership that we have with Jess and Nationwide. In going with this, again, November is Long-Term Care Awareness Month. We do have another webinar scheduled for next Wednesday that's going to touch on a little bit of lifetime long-term care benefits. So Jess probably knows who that is. And, again, go out there, have the conversations. You can't make these sales. You can't be helping people out if you don't have the conversations and you don't make the question. That's the challenge that I give to everybody on the call today. Just have the conversation. Just bring it up. See where it goes. You never know. So, right? Okay. So thank you. If I don't talk to everybody, Jess, have a great Thanksgiving. Everybody that's on the call today. I can't believe it's November, but here we are. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jason.